Hello, everyone. Imagine you are walking through a brilliantly lit, ultra-modern corporate campus. The doors open automatically. Your schedule is seamlessly synchronized to your devices, and your health metrics are monitored by a sleek wearable on your wrist to keep you perfectly optimized. You feel entirely free, entirely empowered. Yet, every single footstep, every heartbeat, and every preference is cataloged, predicted, and utilized to ensure you remain exactly where the system needs you to be. You are not a prisoner in a cell, but you are a perfectly managed node in a vast, invisible grid. Today, we explore this exact phenomenon, the architecture of complicity. We are bringing together the colliding insights of four monumental French postmodern critics, Michel Foucault, Pierre Bourdieu, Jean-François Lyotard, and Jean Baudrillard. We will navigate through Foucault's concept of capillary power, showing how dominance is a pervasive microforce rather than a central authority. We will dissect Bourdieu's mechanisms of the habitus and the symbolic violence, where unconscious dispositions replace external force. We will confront Lyotard's diagnosis of the incredulity towards grand narratives, examining what happens when the promise of progress shatters. Finally, we will enter Baudrillard's hyperreality, where representation replaces reality and the copy has no original. The broken promise of the Enlightenment has morphed the dream of emancipation into a trap of visibility and constant surveillance. By the end of this journey, we must confront the ultimate realization. Our society operates on subject complicity, where we actively participate in our own domination. Consider the ultimate promise made to humanity a few centuries ago. We were told that if we simply cast aside superstition and embraced the steady march of human progress through objective science and logic, we would be entirely free. Reason was supposed to be the great emancipator, the golden key that would unlock the chains of ignorance and tyranny. But look around at the highly efficient machinery of the modern world, as diagnosed by Jean-François Lyotard and the thinkers of the Frankfurt School. This grand narrative of liberation fundamentally collapsed. The rationalization of society did not lead to a utopia of free thinkers. Instead, it morphed into technological totalitarianism. Reason promised universal human emancipation, but actually engineered a factory of oppression. Think about how we currently treat human efficiency. We categorize individuals by their productivity scores, measure their psychological aptitudes with standardized tests, and industrialize human life from the maternity ward to the cubicle. Reason ceased to be a philosophical pursuit of truth and became a brutal surgical tool to categorize, measure, and optimize every fraction of our existence. The actual result of the Enlightenment is that society is trapped in a highly efficient machinery of its own making. We celebrate our advanced metrics and our objective data, entirely missing the fact that these are the very gears grinding down our autonomy. The tragic irony is that the intellectual tools designed to set us free have been perfectly calibrated to manage us as predictable, standardized units of production. When we think of power, we almost instinctively imagine a centralized throne. We picture a monarch issuing decrees, a corrupt politician holding the levers of the state, or the wealthy bourgeoisie hoarding economic dominance. This is the sovereign and the Marxist illusion, the idea of micropower. It operates under the assumption that power is a massive, top down force, repressive, prohibitive, and violent. It tells us, thou shalt not. But Michel Foucault revolutionized our understanding by revealing a profoundly different capillary reality. Power is not a centralized throne to be seized. It is a pervasive network of capillary forces. Imagine power not as a heavy blanket thrown over society, but as the microscopic blood vessels, the capillaries running through every tissue of your body. It is pervasive, ambient, and operates from the bottom up. More importantly, Foucault argued that micropower is not merely repressive, it is highly productive. It generates our knowledge, shapes our identities, and actually produces our deepest desires. It functions through microrelations, behavioral norms, and daily institutional interactions. Power is not a commodity that someone owns. It is a technique that is continuously exercised. You experience this power when you adjust your posture in a meeting, when you modulate your tone in an email, or when you conform to the unspoken rules of a social gathering. You are not being oppressed by a dictator in these moments. You are caught in a web of microforces that guide your behavior so seamlessly. You believe the impulses are entirely your own. Imagine sitting in a brightly lit glass office in the center of a bustling city. You cannot see the executives on the floors above you, but you know their windows look down upon your desk. Because you might be observed at any given second, you keep your back straight, your screen focused on work, and your expressions neutral. You do not need a manager standing over your shoulder. The mere possibility of being watched forces you to manage yourself. In his groundbreaking work, Discipline and Punish, Michel Foucault identifies Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon as the ultimate architectural metaphor for modern power. The Panopticon replaces physical chains with the psychological cage of permanent visibility. In Bentham's design, a darkened central guard tower sits surrounded by backlit cells. The inmate is isolated, unable to communicate with peers, but perfectly and permanently visible to the center. Because the tower is shuttered, the inmate can never verify if they are being watched at any specific moment. Since surveillance is unverified but permanently possible, the inmate simply assumes they are always being watched. The physical guard becomes entirely unnecessary. The internalized guard takes over, and the inmate begins to police their own behavior. The genius of the panoptic trap is its economic efficiency. It requires minimal force to achieve maximum control. The individual absorbs the gaze of the overseer, becoming both the prisoner and the warden in a seamless loop of self-regulation. We forge our own psychological cages, mistaking our quiet compliance for ethical discipline. The terrifying brilliance of the Panopticon is not that it remained a historical blueprint for a prison. It is that it became the underlying architecture for our entire world. Modern society is, in essence, a generalized prison. Michel Foucault demonstrated that the architectural and psychological mechanisms of the prison were seamlessly exported to the rest of society. The disciplinary society replicates the panopticon across every single modern institution. Consider how we arrange our physical spaces to maximize visibility and control. In a prison, we regulate deviance through isolated monitoring, separating individuals into observable cells. But look at the hospital. We regulate disease through clinical observation, placing patients in neat rows of beds where nurses and doctors can survey the ward with a single glance. Look at the school, where we regulate youth through standardized desks facing forward, preparing them for endless exams under the watchful eye of the teacher. And look at the factory, where we regulate labor through assembly lines, positioning workers so that foremen can monitor every micro movement for maximum efficiency. We move from the school desk to the factory floor to the hospital bed, believing we are progressing through the natural stages of a free life. In reality, we are simply being transferred from one panoptic structure to another. The architecture of observation ensures that our bodies remain docile, predictable, and economically useful. We are continuously molded by institutions that operate on the exact same logic of surveillance, isolation, and normalization. We are taught from a very young age that science is a noble, neutral pursuit of truth, entirely separate from the dirty realms of politics and control. Michel Foucault systematically dismantled this Enlightenment idea of pure, objective science. He introduced the concept of Savoir, Pouvoir, the unbreakable symbiotic bond between knowledge and power. Knowledge and power feed an infinite loop of institutional control. Let us examine this mechanism. Step 1 begins with the institutional need. Power requires a justification to intervene in human lives. It cannot simply crush people without reason. It needs a legitimate mandate. Step 2 provides this mandate through scientific definition. The human sciences, psychiatry, criminology, medicine observe populations to define exactly what is normal and what is abnormal. Step 3 involves the application of power. Institutions immediately deploy these newly minted objective classifications to lock up, treat, or discipline those deemed abnormal. Finally, in step 4, we see the generation of data. The controlled subjects generate new clinical data while under surveillance, which refines the science and further expands the reach of power. We think human sciences were invented to cure us, but they were largely engineered to categorize us. The clinical gaze is not just looking for illness, it is gathering intelligence. Power and knowledge do not just cooperate, they are the exact same mechanism viewed from different angles. Power creates the conditions for knowledge to be gathered, and that knowledge provides the absolute scientific justification for power to tighten its grip. To understand how control is justified in the modern era, we must look at the specific knowledge architecture that supports it. We do not chain people to dungeon walls simply because a king demands it anymore. The invention of the abnormal provides the absolute scientific alibi for subjugation. It begins with empirical observation, the meticulous measuring of skulls, the charting of behaviors, the human observation that claims to be entirely neutral. This data flows directly into institutional mandates, fueling legislative conflicts and creating laws based on what science dictates is healthy or dangerous. From this process, societal categories emerge that are entirely constructed, yet presented as the undeniable truth of nature. We invent the madman, we invent the delinquent, and we invent the pervert. These are not natural phenomena. They are clinical classifications engineered to separate the compliant from the non-compliant. Here is the severed dialogue between reason and madness. In the past, madness was allowed to speak, to hold a mirror up to society. Today, we have clinical monologue dominance. Reason refuses to listen. It only diagnoses, medicates, and isolates. Modern power wears a medical mask. Political control masquerades as a medical necessity. When we lock someone in a psychiatric ward or a specialized prison wing, we do not call it political repression. We call it treatment. We call it rehabilitation. By framing control as a therapeutic necessity, power completely shields itself from critique, hiding its iron fist inside a sterile white clinical glove. Let us travel back to the classical era, where the ultimate symbol of authority was the sword. Sovereign power was defined quite simply by the right to kill. If you defied the king destroyed your life. But as we transitioned into the era of late capitalism, a profound transformation occurred. Power transformed into biopower. Biopower shifts the objective of the state from threatening death to meticulously administering life. Power no longer seeks to destroy life. Instead, it seeks to optimize, regulate, and administer it for maximum economic and political efficiency. This operates on two distinct but deeply connected levels. First, there is the anatomical political level. This involves the micromanagement of the individual human body, making it docile, trainable, and economically useful. It is the diet you follow, the ergonomics of your office chair, and the fitness regimens you track on your phone. Second, there is the biopolitical level. This is the macromanagement of the population as a whole. The state regulates birth rates, public health, hygiene, and lifespan. Life itself becomes the supreme object of political strategy. We view public health campaigns, nutritional guidelines, and reproductive policies as benevolence from a caring state, but they are calculated strategies to ensure the population remains a highly productive, smoothly functioning machine. The state cares about your health because a sick body cannot labor and a dying population cannot consume. Power has crept beneath our skin, taking up residence in our very cells, managing our biology to sustain its own dominance. We have established that external cages are incredibly inefficient. Guarding a prisoner requires constant resources, vigilance, and physical force. Power achieves its absolute masterpiece only when it bypasses the physical chains entirely. This is Michel Foucault's brilliant revelation regarding internalized power. Power succeeds only when individuals internalize surveillance, becoming their own overseers. We call these the technologies of the self, the theoretical foundation of pratiques de soi. Subjects voluntarily mold their identities, thoughts, and bodies to perfectly align with institutional standards. The mechanism here is self-subjugation. Think about your daily routines. We confess our flaws to therapists. We optimize our productivity with apps, and we carefully curate our online identities to beg for societal approval. Believing we are on noble quest to find our true selves, we willingly link our deepest desires directly to state and economic needs. The illustrative window of this concept is the willing jailer. You look in the mirror and you police your own reflection. You monitor your weight, your vocabulary, and your emotional responses, ensuring you fit the mold of a productive, normal citizen. The ultimate act of self subjugation is that the individual willingly acts as their own jailer. We do not need the state to threaten us with violence. We discipline ourselves out of a desperate desire to be recognized as legitimate and successful within the system. We mistake our endless self improvement projects for freedom, entirely blind to the fact that we are simply tightening the bolts on our own invisible cages. Up to this point, we have mapped power onto the physical body and the immediate architectural space. Michel Foucault's foundational map provides a punchy takeaway. Power is physical, mapping directly onto the individual body and institutional structures like the prison or the clinic. But dominance operates on a much wider, more abstract terrain. We must undergo a paradigm shift, moving into the invisible battlefield, articulated by Pierre Bourdieu. Bourdieu's cultural topology introduces us to the concept of invisible fields. Society is not a monolithic, unified block where everyone fights on the same ground. Instead, imagine society as intersecting arenas or champs. Takeaway: society is a complex space of overlapping autonomous fields such as the artistic field, the educational field, or the political field. Each of these fields operates with its own hidden rules, its own specific logic, and its own intense struggles for position. You do not fight for dominance in the artistic field using the exact same weapons you would use in the political field. Each arena demands a specific type of currency and a specific way of behaving. Bourdieu reveals that the battles for supremacy are happening all around us, in the polite corridors of universities and the hushed galleries of museums. We are constantly maneuvering for advantage within these invisible fields, entirely oblivious to the structural forces that predetermined our starting positions and rigged the rules of the game long before we even stepped onto the battlefield. If society is a collection of invisible battlefields, what weapons do we use to fight? Dominance relies on a complex portfolio of four capitals, extending far beyond simple economic wealth. Pierre Bourdieu reveals that power is multidimensional. First, we have economic capital, the material base. This includes cash, property, and financial assets. It is the most liquid, but also the most visible and easily critiqued form of power. Second, we have social capital, networks, and alliances. This is who you know, structured into durable obligations and institutional backing. It is the exclusive country club membership or the tight-knit alumni network. Third, we have cultural capital, knowledge and distinction. This exists in three forms. It is embodied in your accent, your posture, and your taste. It is objectified in the books and paintings you own, and it is institutionalized in the educational degrees hanging on your wall. Finally, we have symbolic capital, legitimacy, and recognition. This includes prestige, honor, and recognition. It is the form the other capitals take when they are perceived as legitimate and natural rather than acquired. We often believe that a democratic society has leveled the playing field because economic monopolies are criticized. But the elite maintain their dominance by leveraging their vast reserves of cultural and social capital. A working class prodigy might acquire economic capital, but without the right accent, the right aesthetic references, and the right social affiliations, they will never acquire the symbolic capital necessary to truly penetrate the upper echelons of power. How exactly does raw, vulgar wealth transform into respected social prestige? Pierre Bourdieu calls this the alchemy of capital, the process by which economic dominance is covertly laundered into symbolic prestige. Let us trace this conversion mechanism. The baseline power is tangible economic wealth, which forms the foundational, yet often hidden, basis for social advantage. Economic capital buys cultural capital. Wealth is used to acquire elite education, refined tastes, and cultural knowledge for the next generation. This cultural capital then grants access to social capital. The elite education facilitates entry into exclusive social networks and powerful, durable affiliations. Finally, this dense network of cultural and social advantages crystallizes into symbolic capital, the enlightened outcome, where converted capitals are universally recognized as legitimate prestige and natural merit. The brutal structural reality is the violence of economic inequality. It is the foundational force that enables this entire laundering process. Yet, look at the acceptable illusion of natural talent. Societal perception completely misrecognizes this highly engineered process. When we see the polished, articulate heir to a fortune effortlessly navigating high society, we do not see the massive economic machinery that built them. We mistakenly perceive their dominance as natural talent, individual merit, or innate grace. The original economic advantage has been fatally disguised, laundered into a form of naturalized prestige that the oppressed accept without question, rendering the inequality of the system entirely invisible and morally acceptable. We must ask a terrifying question. How do the oppressed come to accept their miserable lot in life without the state constantly using physical force? Pierre Bourdieu answers this with his concept of the habitus. Habitus is a set of deeply ingrained bodily dispositions, reflexes, and tastes acquired through early socialization. It is the mechanism of internalization. Through early socialization within a specific societal structure, objective social conditions such as poverty, wealth, or class are permanently translated into subjective, seemingly spontaneous choices. You do not consciously decide to feel out of place in a luxury restaurant or entirely at home in a boardroom. Your habitus dictates your bodily reflexes and your level of comfort. This creates the fatal illusion of nature, disguising social inequality as natural. Because the habitus operates completely beneath the level of conscious thought, socially constructed inequality is fatally disguised as natural talent, personality, or good taste. Follow the core logical thread. Objective social inequality leads to the habitus, which is the internalizing of these dispositions. This creates the illusion of nature, making inequality seem organic. The ultimate result is fatal disguise and the passive acceptance of subjugation. The working class child rejects elite culture not because they consciously analyze it, but because their habitus tells them that is not for the likes of us. The oppressed actively police their own boundaries, mistaking the heavy chains of their social conditioning for the spontaneous expressions of their own authentic personalities. We revere the modern education system as the ultimate engine of equality, but Pierre Bourdieu's paradigm shift shatters this mirage. The modern school masquerades as a neutral meritocracy, claiming to reward hard work and innate intelligence. In reality, Bourdieu reveals it as a cultural reproduction machine, a mechanism designed specifically for elite cultural preservation. Let us examine this knowledge architecture. The foundational framework is the democratic system itself, which claims to evaluate everyone equally. However, this system processes students through cultural filters, evaluating them based on language, posture, and aesthetic references. These are linguistic codes and aesthetic references automatically inherited by the elites through their privileged habitus. The system does not teach these codes, it simply demands them. The result is a bifurcated outcome. For the few, we say elite cultural reproduction. The school successfully converts inherited cultural capital into institutionalized success and academic legitimacy. For the masses, the outcome is systemic exclusion and symbolic violence. The system systematically fails those without pre-existing cultural capital. The true horror is not just that the working class fails, it is that the democratic facade convinces them their failure is a result of their own lack of personal intelligence. The school system scientifically legitimizes class inequality turning a rigged cultural game into an unassailable verdict of natural intellectual inferiority. We worship the diploma entirely blind to the fact that it is merely a laundered receipt for inherited cultural privilege. When inequality is flawlessly laundered into merit, we encounter the most insidious form of power, symbolic violence. It is the ultimate complicity. Symbolic violence is an unseen assault. It occurs when the dominant classes impose their meanings, their classifications, and their language so effectively that the dominated accept them as natural and legitimate. The dominated end up carrying the worldview of the dominator on their own shoulders, accepting it as absolute truth. They do not fight back because they do not recognize that an assault has even taken place. This operates through euphemism and denegation, hiding brutal power motives behind the polite masks of culture and common sense. Consider the concepts of proper speech and high culture. When the working class accepts elite accents as the only proper way to speak, or accepts elite art as the only true high culture, they unknowingly legitimize the very criteria that guarantee their own subjugation. You experience symbolic violence when you feel ashamed of your original accent during a corporate interview. You have internalized the dominant class's arbitrary linguistic standard as an objective measure of your own worth. The elite do not need to beat you into submission. They simply define the parameters of intelligence, beauty, and value. By enthusiastically striving to meet standards that were specifically designed to exclude you, you become the most efficient agent of your own marginalization. Symbolic violence ensures that the cage door remains open because the prisoner has been fundamentally convinced that they belong inside. We must now shift our focus to the macroeconomic reality of our era. Jean-François Lyotard identified a fundamental shift in the postmodern condition, the digitization of power. We have entered the information age where power no longer exclusively belongs to those controlling physical territory or factories. Power belongs to those controlling databases and the information flow. This technological shift brought about a profound crisis, the death of grand narratives. Historically, we pursued knowledge for emancipation or to discover absolute universal truths, but those old stories have collapsed. We no longer believe that science will automatically lead to moral progress. The new paradigm is one of performativity and data. Value is no longer determined by truth or wisdom. Value is determined solely by system efficiency and the profit generation, meaning is entirely replaced by raw tradable data. Knowledge is no longer a philosophical pursuit. It is a commodity to be bought, sold, and optimized. The consequence of Lyotard's diagnosis is a desolate cultural landscape. Truth is pixelated into countless fragmented data points. Resistance itself is commodified, packaged, and sold back to us. The human context, the actual lived experience of individuals, is completely lost to the endless, optimized stream of information. We are drowning in data but starved of meaning, operating as highly efficient nodes in a global network that values our output but remains entirely indifferent to our emancipation. Building on the crisis of the information age, we confront the bleak reality of mass media and hyperreality. Jean Baudrillard warns us that contemporary capitalism oppresses us not by depriving us of information, but by oversaturating society with it. We are drowning the silent majority in simulacra. The masses are subjected to constant media overload and bombardment. We are assaulted with endless media spectacles and tailored advertising. What is the result of this bombardment? Instead of rising up in informed rebellion, the apathetic masses simply absorb the overload. They become an apathetic, silent majority. We live in the era of the simulacra, where simulations actively hide the absence of profound truth. Meaning is completely neutralized. Even resistance is commodified and sold back to us as a trendy lifestyle brand. You buy a revolutionary t-shirt manufactured by a multinational corporation, mistaking a purchase for political action. For Baudrillard, we have crossed a terrifying threshold. We no longer interact with reality. We interact only with simulations and signs. The news cycle does not report on the world. It generates a hyper-reality that replaces the world. We are trapped in a hall of mirrors. furiously reacting to digital phantoms and manufactured outrages. The ultimate victory of the system is that it keeps us perpetually distracted, passionately engaging with simulated spectacles, while the actual architecture of our complicity tightens its grip in the shadows. We have mapped the Panopticon, the Habitus, and the hyperreal fog. We must ask, if power is everywhere, and our very desires are programmed, is escape even possible? We are caught in a profound dialectical tension between two conflicting theoretical views. On one side, we have Pierre Bourdieu's structural determinism, focusing on the habitus and the field. This is a pessimistic, closed loop. The internalization of subjugation is so total that even our attempts to rebel are often dictated by the rules of the field. We resist using the exact vocabulary and the methods given to us by the oppressor. On the other side, we have Michel Foucault's theory of local resistance. Foucault argues for a precarious network of relations. His famous maxim states that where there is power, there is resistance. Power is not monolithic, and therefore resistance is a constant tactical friction at the capillary level. Are we trapped or are we free? Bourdieu suggests the invisible cage is nearly impossible to breach because it is built into our nervous system. Foucault offers a glimmer of hope, suggesting that because power is dispersed, our rebellions can also be dispersed, small, and tactical. We are left oscillating between the crushing weight of structural reproduction and the fragile hope of localized capillary sabotage. To understand how we might actually fight back, we must examine Michel Foucault's pivot, the shift from grand revolution to capillary resistance. Foucault decisively rejected the myth of the grand revolution. The old paradigm taught us that power was a single, monolithic block, a centralized throne. Therefore, struggle had to be centralized, aiming for a single, utopian revolution to overthrow the state. But Foucault's theoretical shift changes everything. Power is capillary and local, not a single block. Therefore, resistance must mirror this exact structure. Resistance cannot be a massive, singular uprising. It must be a constant, tactical friction at the capillary level. We escape the Panopticon not by storming the guard tower, but by disrupting lines of sight, refusing imposed identities, and inventing new modes of self. We see these tactical frictions and micro-rebellions everywhere. It is patients fighting against medical dogmas, actively challenging institutional authority within the clinic. It is students fighting against educational standardization, actively resisting uniformity in learning environments. If power operates through the micromanagement of your daily life, then your resistance must also live in the micromanagement of your daily life. It is the refusal to confess, the refusal to optimize, and the refusal to fit neatly into the clinical categories designed to subdue you. True rebellion in the postmodern age is a localized, relentless friction against the invisible forces that seek to administer your life. Even as we engage in capillary resistance, Pierre Bourdieu issues a severe warning against naive optimism. We are caught in the trap of reflexivity. Even our awareness of the game is governed by the rules of the game. The habitus is incredibly resilient. You cannot simply think your way out of dispositions that have been written into your muscle memory since childhood. Even our critiques of elite power often rely on the cultural capital, the vocabulary, and the prestige granted by the very institutions we are criticizing. The radical academic denouncing the university still cashes a university paycheck and desires academic prestige. To truly break the cycle, we cannot just engage in local friction. We demand a ruthless, agonizing reflexivity. We must practice critical self-awareness and constant interrogation. We must constantly interrogate our own dispositions, forcing ourselves to understand how our deepest desires, our tastes, and even our preferred methods of rebellion have been secretly authored by the systems we wish to dismantle. It is not enough to recognize the external cages. We must excavate the jailer we carry inside our own minds. True liberation requires the terrifying admission that the authentic self we are fighting to liberate is in large part, a meticulously engineered product of the very oppression we are trying to escape. We arrive at our ultimate synthesis. The architecture of complicity is complete only when we mistake our invisible cages for freedom. We are surrounded by the invisible cage of knowledge. In terms of architecture and biology, the system measures us in the clinic and monitors us in the Panopticon. In terms of culture and data, it ranks us in the democratic school system and distracts us in the hyper-real digital fog. This is the dark side of reason and complicity. Modern power operates exclusively through these invisible mechanisms. The terrifying truth is that we become complicit in our own subjugation the exact moment we accept dominant classifications, elite tastes, and diagnostic labels as natural and inevitable. As we collide this theory with our current AI era, where algorithms perfectly predict our desires and digital panopticons track our every biometric pulse, the cage becomes even more seamless and invisible. Our data is harvested to optimize our own subjugation. Yet, the synthesis offers a path forward, the realization of true freedom. The first vital act of freedom is realizing that the cage is not made of iron, but of knowledge itself. Our tastes, our unquestioned truths, and our deeply held identities are engineered. That concludes our exploration for today. Thank you for your time, and see you next time.